Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 329. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Sunday, September the 17th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Topic of today's essay, Disclosure Mexico Style. What does that mean? Well, if you've heard the news, I'm going to read the headline here out of one of the UK papers. Alien bodies with three-fingered hands, unknown DNA, and eggs inside are presented by UFO experts as the Mexican Congress and the non-human found in Peru is said to be 1,000 years old. So what's happened is scientists, journalists, I'm not sure what you call them. We'll do the story, then you can decide what they are. Have found something, and they've actually presented it in front of Congress. Not the U.S. Congress, but the Mexican Congress. Now you think, well, why wouldn't they present it in front of the U.S. Congress? Why would they want to go to the Mexican Congress? Well, because this guy's Mexican. That's why. So he presented it in front of the Congress of his own country. And I'm not willing to say if this is a hoax, if this is for real, if these are space aliens, if these are something else. I don't know. But what I did find is the stories, I would say, has some credibility. We'll find out more as time progresses, as we usually do on these stories. But I find it interesting. And I guess what I would say is more countries, the U.S. seems to be covering this kind of stuff up, okay? For whatever reason. And when I say covering it up, I mean because there's not full disclosure. Okay, we'll go ahead and release the papers with half of the words in the document redacted. Okay, well then you're not being upfront and honest. And if you're redacting documents, you're hiding something, in my opinion. They're not hiding a whole lot here in this presentation to the Mexican Congress. But we'll talk about that and more about just the history of UFOs and where they are and how long we've really been talking about this stuff. And it's longer than you may think. But before we get into that, I just wanted to touch on one story that just recently has made its way into the headlines. And it makes me want to pull my hair out, because the tolerance of people nowadays, it's getting less and less. People are less and less tolerant of anyone who doesn't agree with them, who says something that they don't like. And the mantra is, look, everyone needs to be an individual. Everyone needs to be able to speak their own mind. Everyone needs to be able to say whatever they want to say, just so it's politically correct with the dopes of the day who are running the show, okay? And it also bothers me a little bit when I have to stick up for somebody who I've never liked, who I've never respected, and I've never thought very highly of. But I have to stick up for him, and I'll tell you why. First, let me tell you who. Jan Wenner. Do you know who Jan Wenner is? Most of you have probably heard the name. Most of you say, yeah, he's got something to do with music, right? Yeah, he does. Jan Wenner, he was one of the founders of Rolling Stone magazine. He was also one of the founders of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's 77. He's been around a long, long time. And he was recently canceled by the media, canceled by everybody because of what he said. And he's no longer on the board of Rolling Stone magazine. They've kicked him off the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is odd because, okay, I founded this. I founded that, or at least I was a co-founder of both of those. And now they've kicked him off because he said something controversial. Jan Wenner has been saying things controversial for 50 years. He's always been biased. He's always been one-sided. He's always been very opinionated. He's never cared what people have said. He's been dishonest. And now all of a sudden, when he says something that hurts somebody's feelings, he's gone. Well, let me tell you what he did, okay? And I will read the stories from, this is from the AP. Jan Wenner, who co-founded Rolling Stone magazine and was also a co-founder of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, has been removed from the Hall's board of directors after making comments that were seen as disparaging towards black and female musicians. Now, he apologized within hours. A quote from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame says, Jan Wenner has been removed from the board of directors after his comments were published in a New York Times interview. Now, Wenner created a firestorm during a publicity for his new book. He's got a new book out called The Masters. And what it does is it highlights some of the masters of rock and roll. Bob Dylan, Jerry Garcia, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, Pete Townsend, and Bono. Okay? Now, like every other list, whether it's a sports list or a rock and roll list, you've got your GOATs, the greatest of all times, the ones you think are the best. So the masters, these are the guys he thinks are the best, okay? Now, what's the problem with it? Why is everybody going crazy about this? Well, because they're all white men. Yeah, that's really why people are going insane about this. So they asked him, they said, hey, look, why didn't you interview women or black musicians? And here's what Wenner said. It's not that they're not inarticulate, although go have a deep conversation with Grace Slick or Janis Joplin. Please be my guest. You know, Joni Mitchell was not a philosopher of rock and roll. She didn't, in my mind, meet that test. Translation? Nothing wrong with Grace Slick or Janis Joplin or Joni Mitchell. They just didn't fit the bill. And of black artists, this is, we continue with the quote from Wenner. Of black artists, you know, Stevie Wonder, genius, right? I suppose when you use a word as broad as masters, and the fault is just using that word. Maybe Marvin Gaye or Curtis Mayfield. I mean, they just didn't articulate at that level. In other words, sure, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, they're fine, but they didn't fit the bill. If you've got a top 6, how many were there in here? Was it 6? Let's see here. Let's see. Dylan, Garcia, Jagger, Lennon, Springsteen, Townsend, Bono. Okay, there's 7 of them. You're going to leave somebody out. I mean, Paul McCartney's not in that group. Elton John's not in that group. I mean, there's a lot of people who aren't in that group. Jimi Hendrix isn't in that group. Who's the other guy? The fellow who from the Doors. Morrison. There's a lot of people who aren't in that group. And to be fair, these are all old buddies of Jan Wenner. Wenner partied with these guys. They were his buddies. They were his pals. Okay? So naturally, you're going to include your buddies. You could pick from a list of 100 and make that your top 7, and people weren't going to have an argument. But when you pick the best and you don't include someone who's black or a woman, canceled. Now you think to yourself, well, maybe he should have just chosen his words better and shouldn't have been so controversial. Friends, Jan Wenner has been controversial all his life. And in fact, this was when I was done with Rolling Stone magazine. Rolling Stone magazine, once upon a time, was always a good publication, so you could go ahead and read something about music. And then they started getting political. And Jan Wenner is something to the right of Barry Sanders when it comes to politics. During the elections, Rolling Stone interviewed Bill Clinton, Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, always during the election. He never interviewed any of the Republican candidates. He interviewed these guys. Why? Because he wanted to help them with their election. And nobody ever called him on it. He hired Hunter S. Thompson to do interviews before and didn't pay him. He sent Hunter S. Thompson to Vietnam to cover the Vietnam War as Saigon was falling, okay, and reneged on paying him. I mean, the guy he's biased. He's always been controversial. He's always been opinionated. And in the opinion of many, he's dishonest. but that's just the way he is. But when he picks what he calls the masters, the best rockers of all time, and he doesn't include a woman, and he doesn't include a black person, done. Canceled. I always think to myself, and these lists, I don't know why I do this. Maybe it's just torture to myself, but I like to look at these lists because I always find fault with them. And one of the biggest lists, if you want to start getting racial, are lists of the greatest NBA players ever. The black population of this country is what, 12%? And on many, if not most, of the starting 5 best ball players of all time, they're almost all black. And I think to myself, well, why isn't Larry Bird on there? Well, you can make an argument that Magic Johnson was better than Larry Bird, okay? So we chose him over him. And by the way, when you're picking your favorite sports guys, that's fine. I see Oscar Robertson left off the list quite often, okay? But that's because he played a long time ago. I never see Bob Cousy. I never see George Mikan. You never see John Havlicek. None of these guys are included. None of these white people are included on the greatest NBA players of all times. Almost never. But you know what? That's just the way it is. And a lot of times, they choose the best because the person who's choosing the best is 24 years old and never saw the other ones play. Which, if you think about it, if you never really saw them play, maybe you shouldn't pick them. I've always picked Bob Gibson as the best player of all times, not baseball player, not the best pitcher, the best ball player, because he's the only one that ever changed the rules because he was just too good, okay? Who was better, Henry Aaron or Babe Ruth? Well, I saw Henry Aaron play, and I just saw the numbers on Babe Ruth. Who was better, Henry Aaron or Barry Bonds? If you never saw Henry Aaron play, maybe you can't make that judgment. In his defense, Jan Wenner saw all these guys, okay? He saw Mick Jagger. And actually, he was friends with them. Mick Jagger, Bob Dylan, Jerry Garcia, John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, Pete Townsend, Bono. He's their buddy. Now think about it. If you were buddies with, let's say, Steph Curry, if he was your friend and somebody asked you, who's one of the best shooters of all time? Is it Steph Curry or is it Michael Jordan? And Steph Curry's your buddy. You're probably going to pick Steph Curry because that's your buddy. Why? Why wouldn't you pick Michael Jordan? Well, because you never met him. You never saw him play. It's kind of like that. So again, I didn't want to go into this so long, over 12 minutes, almost 13 minutes into this, but this whole cancel culture thing has just got to stop. And what seems to be funny is the ones that are getting canceled seem to be the ones that are old men. Like Jan Wenner. He's 77. To say he's past his prime, to say he's been pushed out of the limelight is being kind. I'll never forget Garrison Keillor, the story with Garrison Keillor. And this is probably 5, 6, maybe even 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I don't even know. It's been so long ago. But Garrison Keillor, from Lake Wobegon days, he was, he'd tell stories on PBS. I mean, how controversial can you get? Garrison Keillor was everybody's uncle or grandfather, okay? Never offensive at all. And then a lady accused him of saying something offensive in the 1960s. And he was asked about that. He said, I don't know who that person is. Well, she says, you said such and such and that, and you acted out of character and you embarrassed her and you were inappropriate with what you were saying. So you need to apologize. And Garrison Keillor said, look, I don't know who this person is. I don't know what you're talking about. And the interviewer said, well, you mean you're denying it? And Keillor said, I'm not denying it. I'm telling you, I'm 82 years old. This happened over 50 years ago. I really don't remember it. Maybe I did say something inappropriate to some lady, but I don't remember it. Well, PBS demanded he apologize for it. And Keillor basically said, how can I apologize for something that I don't know if I did or not? They said, look, if you don't apologize, we're going to cancel your show. He said, oh, really? I got a news flash for you. I quit. And you've never heard from Garrison Keillor again. That's the kind of stuff people are getting canceled for. That's the kind of stuff that makes my head just turn, makes me crazy. Because this tolerant, inclusive society that we have is tolerant and inclusive until you say something that hurts their feelings. Then they're no longer tolerant. Then they're no longer inclusive, because you've got to say things that they agree with. What Jan Wenner said about black and female artists is no different from what he's been saying about a lot of people all his life. Jan Wenner called Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones recently, said they looked like they were like something from the cast of Lord of the Rings. A bunch of goofy old men. And this is his buddy. This is one of the guys who he picked as one of the masters, Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger called him out on it. And he said, look, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but I like to say things to get a rise out of people. And it was all forgotten. Mick Jagger didn't cancel him. To say that the Rolling Stones, now here I'm picking a list again, to say the Rolling Stones are the best rock group of all time, personally, I think that's a true statement, by the way. And I say that because they've been around for 60 years, okay? Well, what about the Beatles? Okay, they were around for 5. All right, 6 if you push the envelope. That's it. Not 60, 6. So the Rolling Stones have been relevant 10 times longer than the Beatles, okay? And they're not done. They just released a new album and a new single, okay? They're getting ready to go on tour again. Jan Wenner said something controversial, but that's his MO. Anyway, I need to get off of that and get on to the essay. If you have any comments on this, please, jamestrongshow@hotmail.com. Feel free to send me an email. I'll be glad to have a discussion about this. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, maybe you've just canceled me. I don't know. Okay, here we go. Today's essay, Disclosure Mexico Style. Did you see the headlines? And these headlines, I thought it grabbed me. At first, it looked ridiculous. And there have been memes all over Facebook making fun of this because, well, to be honest, it's good material to make fun of. Pardon me. But alien bodies with 3-fingered hands. In fact, alien is in quotes because they're not, nobody is saying that they are. They have unknown DNA. They have eggs inside of them. They were presented by a UFO expert at to the Mexican Congress. And they were found in Peru, and they're about 1,000 years old. Now, this is the moment that a UFO investigator presented 2 allegedly non-human bodies to the Mexican Congress full of astonished officials. Now, Jaime Maussan, who has led investigations into alien phenomena for decades, stood with scientists to unveil 2 corpses in what he called a watershed event in front of the Mexican Congress Tuesday. The researchers made the extraordinary claim that the corpses, presented in windowed boxes and supposedly recovered from Cuzco in Peru, were not part of our terrestrial evolution, with 30% of their genetic composition still unknown. That's according to the Mexican media. Now, carbon dating by the National Autonomous University of Mexico found the bodies. They had 3 fingers, no teeth, and stereoscope vision, in other words, 2 eyes. They were more than 1,000 years old, Maussan claimed. Now, the bizarre presentation has triggered a frenzy of excitement among conspiracy theorists online, but it has also drawn skepticism. Now, unusually for fossils that have been suspected to analysis, these specimens were coated in what appears to be sand. But Maussan, who's been associated with the debunked alien theories in the past, insisted under oath on Tuesday that these specimens were not part of our terrestrial evolution. Maussan continued, these aren't beings that were found after UFO wreckage. They were found in a diatom, in other words, algae mines, and then they were fossilized, okay? So they're not saying these are UFOs. They're saying these are some creature that is not human. He later said, well, whether or not they're aliens, we don't know, but we believe they were intelligent and they live with us. They should rewrite history. But a retractable neck and a long skull show characteristics more typical of birds, reported the newspaper El País, the country. They were also found to have strong, light bones, no teeth, said the presenters. Now, experts in Congress, the Mexican Congress, showed apparent x-rays of the specimens and told deputies that one of the beings carried eggs with embryos inside of them. They said they had implants of cadmium and osmium metals. Osmium is one of the scarcest elements in the Earth's crust and considered the rarest of precious metals. Now, Maussan described the event as a watershed moment, the first time Mexico held a formal dialogue to acknowledge the phenomenon. Maussan went on to say that the bodies were recently studied at the Autonomous National University of Mexico, where scientists studied them with radiocarbon dating. Now, at Tuesday's event, a number of U.S. and Mexican officials appeared to present on unidentified aerial phenomenon. Abraham Loeb, who's the director of the Harvard Astronomy Department, appeared by video link and called on the Mexican government to allow international scientists to further research the specimens. Rich Graves, who's a retired director of the U.S. Navy and a former Navy pilot, was also among those in attendance. Now, Mr. Graves gave testimony earlier this year on UAP sightings and government classifications. He made claims in July about the threats that UAPs pose to American national security. Now, Graves claimed that UFOs were an open secret in the military, and he testified that his squadron regularly detected unidentified objects while stationed off the coast of Virginia in 2014. Similar parliamentary sessions in Mexico saw requests that authorities made available relevant classified documents. Now, back in August, Department of Defense announced a new website that would provide, anyway, it goes on and on. This is more about the United States UFOs, okay? But all present took an oath during this presentation to the Mexican Congress. In fact, so these were all statements made under oath. Now, here's where this gets a little bit tricky. Have you ever heard the name Jaime Maussan? Maybe you have, because he's been in the news before. Back in 2015, Maussan unveiled another mummified body. He claimed it was an alien. Now, the body was found, this was also in Peru, near the Nazca lines in Peru, and the bodies were, the Nazca lines were between 50 and 1,200 feet long, but that's where the bodies were found, near the Nazca lines. However, the bodies found in Peru, they did tests on them, and they were found to be simply human children. Now, if you've seen the pictures of these creatures, these aren't human. At least they don't look human. They almost look like papier-mâché models. But the guy claims they're mummified and they were covered in some type of dust. So we'll see. I don't think this story's going away. Why are we so mesmerized with this stuff, with UFOs? And this is really nothing new. I mean, sure, it became more prevalent with Roswell. It became more prevalent after NASA. It became more prevalent after we landed on the moon. But this has been going around for a long time, okay? A real long time. How long, you ask? Well, how about biblical times? What, you ask? That's right. In fact, UFO sightings go all the way back to biblical times. In fact, in the Bible's book of Ezekiel, a mysterious ship is described as appearing in the sky in modern-day Kuwait. Strange sightings were recorded around Rome in 218 BC. A wave of mysterious apparitions appeared around the 4th century in China when a moonboat was documented floating overhead once every 12 years. A smattering of other unfamiliar objects in the sky were noted in Germany in 1561, in Hull, England in 1801, the multiple times during World War II, when the Allied pilots, they used to call them Foo Fighters. They described them as odd circles of light that pilots noticed flanking their planes during combat. Now, the term UFO, unidentified flying object, was coined back in 1953 by the United States Air Force as a bucket term for unexplained sightings like these. Stateside sightings, which are hardly restricted to the military flyover zones, however, the first recorded UFO sightings dated back to 1639. Yeah, 1639, long before they had planes or satellites. John Winthrop wrote in his diary about a large, strange light in the sky that shot back and forth. This was in 1639. By the time he and other men on his boat got their wits about them, the vessel was a mile from where it had originally been spotted. Now, since 1974, the National UFO Reporting Center has processed more than 150,000 reports. Stacker, that's a publication, compiled a ranking of the states with the most reported UFO sightings, and golly, it's California. Shocking. Each state also included details of famous UFO sightings that were from each state. Of note is that the vast majority of UFOs came between 4 p.m. and midnight, the peak being between 9 and 10 p.m. Now, food for thought next time you're out scoping for alien life. Now, that's when most people are out and about. I mean, there's more people outside looking at the sky at 9:30 at night than there are at 3:30 in the morning. So maybe that's why, who knows? The first documented image of a UFO was captured in 1870. That's the first photo on the summit of Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Now, more sightings were reported on Mount Rainier in Washington in 1947, and of course, Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Now, if you want to see something interesting, go ahead and Google Mount Washington, New Hampshire UFO. Just Google that. And it's a photograph of a mountain peak with what looks like a UFO on it, okay? And this is from 1870. Now, was it faked? Why would anyone fake a UFO photograph in 1870 when stuff didn't even fly, okay? Now, a surge in eyewitness accounts begot even more sightings as time passed. And then they started with little green men, and things progressed and progressed and progressed. But since biblical times, we've had UFO sightings. Now, documented UFO sightings, not so long. In fact, the first ever, what I think is the first ever documented UFO sighting happened in a place actually where I've been. In the UK, in the town of Hull, right on the River Humber in, I guess it would be eastern England, in the Midlands, okay, near the town of Grimsby, near a port, okay. Now, that was the first ever documented UFO, June 19th, 1801, okay. It was a huge moon-like orb that appeared with a weird blue light between midnight and 1 a.m., and, of course, we talked about the earliest UFO picture from Mount Washington, New Hampshire. That was 1870, okay? However, some spotters claim flashes in ancient drawings show aliens have been visiting Earth since the dawn of mankind. You've all seen those pictures, like Peruvian pictures of what looks like a guy in a spacecraft. And maybe that's what it is, maybe it isn't. But you have to ask yourself, okay, if this isn't a guy in a spaceship, what is it? Now, the Hull sighting was backed by newspaper reports from July of that year. In fact, these newspapers were unearthed by a city historian. His name is Mike Koval, and he was intrigued by UFO literature, and so he started investigating this. And sure enough, he started looking at newspapers from Hull in the archives back in 1801. And he described a sighting somewhere over the northeast of England in 1801. Now, Mr. Covell trawled the newspaper archives as early as 1900, and he was astonished to find that the phenomena actually occurred in Hull. Now, at that time, Hull was home to about 27,000 people, and it was just starting to establish itself as a port. That's the River Humber, which is a big river in England and goes out to the sea. The Northampton Mercury, that was the name of the newspaper, reported on Saturday, July the 11th, 1801, that an eyewitness saw an immense moon with a black bar across it loom over the Humber, that's the river, from the southwest. Now, reports continued. It seemed then to form itself into 7 small, distinct moons or globes of fire, which disappeared for the space of a few seconds. Now, its reappearance was equally as brilliant. It showed at first itself like the face of the moon, afterwards 5 circular balls, lastly like several small stars, which gradually faded away, leaving the whole atmosphere brilliantly illuminated. Now, the Chester Chronicle also reported in an article Friday, July 17th, 1801, quote, during the time of it being visible, a faint blue light fell upon the surrounding objects, like that of distant torches. And when entirely gone, the appearance was serene, like a fine summer's morning. Now, Mr. Covell said that the type of craft observed were completely different than the cigar-shaped UFOs spotted in America in 1947 on, the Roswell-type photographs. He said, in fact, it looked more like the Death Star. It bathed the entire city in blue light, which must have been terrifying. No one at that time even dreamed that there might be little green men, Covell continued. So everyone was baffled and trying to figure out what it was all about. It's the oldest sighting that we have documented and that we've managed to break down so far, Covell continued. We knew about the Mount Washington UFO, but this trumps all that by a long shot. Covell continued, I just wanted to find UFO sightings connected to Hull so as to find records of the oldest one to be properly documented, and this was astonishing. There are a lot of portraits of stuff flying around in the sky from biblical times as well. But there you have it. I talked about the Dallas Morning Star UFO back in the early 1900s, where it said it came through the town of Aurora and knocked down the bell tower and crashed, and they buried the beings. That was the Dallas Morning Star, a real live newspaper. That was around more than 100 years ago, 1904, I want to say, something like that. But this was 1801, and it was documented by 2 newspapers in the town of Hull, both being very similar. So if it was some guy playing a joke, why would both newspapers have reported it? And the way they describe it is unlike anything they would have had in that area at that time. So what was this? A bunch of people's imagination? A UFO from someplace else? Time travelers? Probably not the planet Venus. Probably not swamp gas like we hear lots of times. But it was something. And this whole UFO phenomenon has been going on for a long time. And it's going to continue to go on. What is it? Don't know. Like these alien bodies that were presented in front of the Mexican Congress. And alien is in air quotes, because alien, they don't mean necessarily from another world. These may have been beings who lived here before humans. Who knows? No, they're not saying. All they're saying is, look, here's something. We don't know what it is. And let's talk about it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Whenever we have something that's a bit out of the ordinary, I think we're all better served to scratch our heads and investigate it and see what it is, rather than to just discount it as somebody's imagination. There was a UFO. Yeah, they said it was a UFO. This was years ago. You've probably seen this with they have the head was actually a large cranium, and the back of the head went back, and it actually looked like an X-ray or a fossil of the creature from the movie Alien. That was later found to be a baby that was severely deformed and buried. So it was 100% human, just a deformed human being. Okay. They've explained that one away. Maybe this will be something very similar. It's hard to say. But until we investigate it, we just won't know. And as we investigate it, as we peel back the onion, we tend to find out a little bit more each and every time. Well, that's it. We're done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Send me your email if you want, and I will send you a link to the podcast upon publication so you can download it and listen to it at your leisure. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.